Henry II of Castile, King of Castile and Leon. Henry II, the 13th of January 1334, the 29th of May 1379, called Henry of Trastamara or the Fratricidal, El Fratricida, was the first king of Castile and Leon from the house of Trastamara. He became king in 1369 by defeating his half-brother, Peter the Cruel, after numerous rebellions and battles. As king he was involved in the Fernandine Wars and the 100 Years' War. Biography. Henry was the fourth of 10 illegitimate children of King Alfonso XI of Castile and Eleanor de Guzman, a great-granddaughter of Alfonso IX of Leon. He was born a twin to Fadrique Alfonso, Lord of Haro, and was the first boy born to the couple that survived to adulthood. At birth, he was adopted by Rodrigo Alvarez de las Asturias. Rodrigo died the following year and Henry inherited his lordship of Noina. His father later made him Count of Trastamara and Lord over Lemos and Sarria in Galicia, and the towns of Cabrera and Ribera, which constituted a large and important heritage in the northeast of the peninsula. It made him the head of the new Trastamara dynasty, arising from the main branch of Burgundy-Ivrea. While Alfonso XI lived, his lover Eleanor gave a great many titles and privileges to their sons. This caused discontent among many of the noblemen and in particular the Queen, Maria of Portugal, and her son, Pedro, known as Pedro the Cruel and the Just. They had a chance for revenge when Alfonso XI died unexpectedly from a fever in the siege of Gibraltar in March, 1350. They pushed Eleanor, her sons and their supporters aside, and Henry and his brothers fled and scattered. They were fearful of what their brother, the new King Pedro I of Castile, could do to them. The late king had not even been buried. Although Eleanor and her sons reached an agreement with Pedro to live peacefully in his court, the situation remained unstable. Henry and his brothers Fadrique, Tello and Sancho staged numerous rebellions against the new king. Also, to strengthen his position and gain allies, Henry married Juana Manuel, the daughter of Juan Manuel, Prince of Villena, Adelantado Mayor of Murcia and Lord of Villena, the most prosperous nobleman of the realm. In 1351, the king took counsel from Juan Alfonso de Albuquerque, Maria of Portugal's right-hand man. He became convinced that his father's lover was the instigator of the uprisings, so he ordered Eleanor to be incarcerated and finally executed in Talavera de la Reina. After that, Henry fled to Portugal. He was pardoned by Pedro and returned to Castile, then revolted in Asturias in 1352. He reconciled with his brother, only to rebel against him again in a long, intermittent war, which ended with Henry's flight to France, where he entered the service of John II of France. Shortly after, Henry and his men spent time in Peter IV of Aragon's army in their war against Castile, 1358. During that conflict, he was defeated and held prisoner in Nájera, 1360. He was liberated, with the help of Juan Ramirez de Arellano, among others, and exiled himself to France once more. Then Peter IV of Aragon attacked Castile again. Henry agreed to help him on condition that he would lend his support to destroying his brother, Pedro of Castile. This became the Castilian Civil War. The attack combined Henry's Castilian allies, the Aragonese and the French, a company of Bertrand d'Uguesclin's mercenaries, expelled by Pedro, who had taken refuge in Guyenne. Henry was proclaimed king in Clajara, 1366. In return, he had to reward his allies with titles and riches for the help they had provided. This earned him the nickname El de las Mercedes, Mercedes being Spanish for mercies. Pedro of Castile fled north to Bordeaux, the capital of the English dominions in France, where Edward, the Black Prince, held court. Edward agreed to help Pedro recover his throne. Despite the fact that the army suffered so badly from dysentery that it is said that 1 out of every 5 Englishmen would not return home, on the 3rd of April 1367 an Anglo-Gascon army, led by Edward and his younger brother, John of Gaunt, 1st Duke of Lancaster, met the Castilian forces, supported by French mercenaries under Bertrand d'Uxclin. Pedro then defeated Henry in the Battle of Nájera, but Henry escaped and returned to France under the protection of Charles V of France. King Pedro and Prince Edward parted ways over the funding of the expedition, and the Black Prince returned to Bordeaux, having contracted an illness on this expedition that would ail him until his death in 1376. They reorganized their army at II of Castile. Then, with the help of many Castilian rebels and Bertrand d'Uxclin's Frenchmen, they defeated Pedro at the Battle of Motil on the 14th of March 1369. Henry killed the cruel king, now a prisoner, with his own hand. This definitively won him the Castilian throne and the name of Henry II. Before being consolidated in his throne and being able to hand on power to his son John, Henry had to defeat Ferdinand I of Portugal. He embarked on the three Ferdinand Wars. Ferdinand's main ally in these wars was John of Gaunt, 1st Duke of Lancaster, the husband of Constance of Castile, Duchess of Lancaster, who was Pedro I's daughter. Henry was allied with Charles V of France. He put the Castilian navy at Charles' disposal and they played a key part in the siege of La Rochelle, and the Battle of La Rochelle where the Admiral Ambrosio Bocanegra completely defeated the English side. Henry recompensed his allies, but he still had to defend his interests in the Kingdom of Castile and Leon. Consequently, he denied the King of Aragon the territories that he had promised him in the difficult times. Henry then went to war against Portugal and England in the 100 Years' War. For most of his reign he had to fight off the attempts of John of Gaunt, a son of Edward III of England, to claim the Castilian throne in right of his second wife, Pedro's daughter, Infanta Constance of Castile. In his domestic policy he started to rebuild the kingdom, sped up the transformation of the royal administration, and held numerous courts. He also permanently set up the lordship of Biscay after the death of his brother Tello. In foreign policy, he favored France over England. He died on the 29th of May 1379 in Santo Domingo de la Calzada. His son John I of Castile succeeded him on the throne. Policy regarding Jews. Henry was as hostile to the Jews as Pedro had been friendly. In order to pay Bertrand d'Uxclin's mercenaries, he imposed a war contribution of 20,000 gold doubloons on the already heavily oppressed community of Toledo, and issued an order to take all the Jews of Toledo as prisoners, to give them neither food nor drink, and if they still refused to raise this enormous sum, to sell their property, both movable and immovable, at auction. Nonetheless, he was compelled, owing to his financial straits, to have recourse to Jewish financiers. He made Don Joseph Pigeon his chief tax collector, contador major, and appointed several Jews farmers of the taxes, the demands of the Cortes Intera, 1369, and in Burgos, 1374 and 1377, against the Jews harmonized perfectly with Henry's inclinations. He ordered the Jews to wear the humiliating badge, and forbade them to use Christian names. He further ordered that for short loans Christian debtors should repay only 2/3 of the principal. Shortly before his death Henry declared that Jews should no longer be permitted to hold public office. Henry was potentially the first ruler since the Visigothic king Urgica to implement anti-Jewish policies in the Iberian Peninsula. Burial. After Henry's death, his body was transported to Burgos, then to Valladolid, then finally to Toledo where he was buried in Capilla de los Reyes de Toledo. His remains are still there today. His grave is in the choir stalls at one side of the church and it is in the Plateresque style. The box is adorned with the shields of Castile and Leon, and the lower interior part has 3 panels decorated with trophies. There are 2 cherubs over the panels, holding the cartouche on which the king's epitaph is displayed. The inscription translates to, "Here lies the most adventurous and noble knight and king, the sweetly remembered Don Henry, son of the late noble King Don Alfonso, who came from Benmarin and ended his life in Santo Domingo de la Calzado. He just died gloriously on the 30th day of May, in the year of our Saviour Jesus Christ MCLX6. There is a recumbent statue of Henry II on top of the tomb. It is made from polychromed alabaster. It depicts the king wearing his royal robes, with his sword in his left hand and his girdle decorated with the lions of Castile. His right hand holds the scepter, the upper end of which rests on 3 pillars that support the monarch's head. The king wears slippers and his feet rest on a recumbent lion. The king's entrails are buried in the Cathedral of Santo Domingo de la Calzada. Partners and children. On the 27th of July 1350, Henry married Juana Manuel, the daughter of Juan Manuel, Prince of Villena, head of a younger branch of the royal house of Castile. They had 3 children: John I, 1358 to 1390, Eleanor, 1361 to 1425, wife of Charles III of Navarre, Joanna, 1367 to 1374, died young. He had several children outside wedlock, some of which he mentioned in his will dated the 29th of May 1374. Alfonso Enriquez, Count of Gijón and Noina, 1355, circa 1400, a son of Elvira Iniguez, Count of Noina and Gijón. He married Isabel of Portugal, Lady of Visay. Leonor de Castilla, daughter of Leonor Alvarez, from Duenas, Palencia. Juana de Castilla, 1367 ? Daughter of Elvira Iniguez. Her father mentioned her in his will, and said that if she did not marry Pedro de Aragon then she would inherit Oena. Pedro was the Marquis of Villena, 1362, Aljubarrota, 1385, and son of Alfonso de Aragon wife Oix. Constanza Enriquez de Castilla. Her father did not mention her mother's name. When he wrote the will in 1374, she was engaged to Infante Denis, Lord of Cifuentes, 1354 to 1397. However, she eventually married his brother, Infante John, Duke of Valencia de Campos, 1349 to 1387. She inherited Alba de Tormes. Fernando Enriquez de Castilla, 1365 to 1438. His father describes him as the son of Beatriz Fernandez. Maria de Castilla, 1375 circa 1393, daughter of Beatriz Fernandez. She married Diego Hurtado de Mendoza, Admiral of Castile, Lord of Mendoza, and Mordomar heir of King John II of Castile. Fadrique de Castilla, 1360 to 1394, son of Beatriz Ponce de Leon y Jerica. Named Duke of Benevente by his father, he died in prison in Almodovar del Rio in 1394. He married Leonor Sanchez de Castilla, illegitimate daughter of Sancho Alfonso, 1st Count of Alburquerque. Beatriz de Castilla, -1409, daughter of Beatriz Ponce de Leon y Jerico and Lady of Niebla. She married Juan Alonso de Guzman in 1370 or 1371. He was Lord of San Lucar de Barrameda and the 1st Count of Niebla. Later he became a monk in the San Clement Monastery in Seville, where he was buried. Enrique de Castilla, 1378 to 1404, son of the Cordoban Lady Juana de Sousa, daughter of Vasco Alfonso de Sousa, the mayor of Córdoba, with Maria Gómez Carrillo, the Duchess of Medina Sidonia and Countess of Cabra. Enrique is buried in the Cathedral of Córdoba. Pedro Enriquez de Castilla, -1366. He is buried in Segovia Cathedral. Isabel Enriquez de Castilla, circa 1419, daughter of Juana de Carcamo. She married Gonzalo Núñez de Guzman. However, this marriage was dissolved by Pope Clemente VII. Later she entered the monastery of Santa Clara la Real de Toledo, where she became its abbess and was buried. Ins Enriquez de Castilla, circa 1443, daughter of Juana de Carcamo, also an abbess of the monastery at Santa Clara la Real de Toledo, where she was buried. Juana Enriquez de Castilla, daughter de Juana, Lady of Cifuentes and wife of Infante Denis, Lord of Cifuentes, 1354–1397, son of Peter I of Portugal and Inés de Castro. She is buried at Santa Maria de Guadalupe. Titles. By the end of his reign, he bore the titles of the King of Castile, Toledo, Leon, Galicia, Sevilla, Córdoba, Murcia, the Algarve and Lord of Molina. Notes. 1. Although she is called Inés de Vigo in some genealogies, King Henry II mentions her several times in his will as Elvira Iniguez. This could be an error transmitted from one genealogy to another, or perhaps it refers to another mistress and mother of one or more of his illegitimate issue. 2. Her marriage was celebrated in 1378 by Enrique de Villena among others, Master of the Orden de Calatrava, Count of Cangas and Tineo, and husband of Maria de Albornoz, Lady of the Infantado. 3. She is not mentioned in her father's will. 4. He is not mentioned in his father's 1374 will. 5. Both sisters feature in the monastery's documents, receiving various favors from their uncle the King Henry III of Castile.